She was a princess. Her sister was the most famous woman alive. And for 60 years, Lee Radziwill stood close enough to history to touch it, and was never once allowed to hold it. There is a photograph of her aboard a yacht in the Greek light, pearls in place, every inch of silk obeying her command. Beside her stand the people who could bend nations and fortunes toward themselves. Her sister, Jacqueline, her husband, a Polish prince, and the Greek shipping magnate, Aristotle Onassis, who would, within a few years, marry into this family and break something in it that never healed. Here is what almost no one in that photograph knew. Before Onassis ever looked at Jackie, he had wanted Lee. He chose the younger sister first, and then, like the world always did, he changed his mind. That is the quiet engine of her life. Not poverty, she had money. Not obscurity, she had beauty, taste, a title, and a face the cameras loved. What she never had was the one thing she wanted most, to be the one who was chosen. The subject, not the relation. The center, not the edge of the frame. She would spend a lifetime reaching for it. And in a single merciless summer near the end, the price of that lifetime came due all at once, when she lost her nephew and her son within a single month of each other. But that is where the story ends. It begins, as these things do, in a New York nursery, where a little girl was already learning that she had been born 4 years too late. March 3, 1933. Caroline Lee Bouvier was born into a family already arranged around another child. 4 years earlier, there had been Jacqueline. In some families, birth order is only a number. In the Bouvier household, it became geography. Jackie stood slightly ahead. Lee stood slightly behind. One sister learned stillness. The other learned to watch, to read faces, to measure moods, to know the instant a room turned warm or cold. Her father gave her that education without meaning to. John Vernou Bouvier III, Black Jack, was a Wall Street man with dark good looks and charm enough to fill a room, and habits that left ruin behind the charm. He drank, he strayed, he dazzled, then disappeared. A charming father teaches a daughter to adore glamour. An unreliable one teaches her to fear it. Lee felt his absences keenly, and she believed, rightly or not, that Jackie received more of what he had to give. Children do not need proof to form a lifelong belief. They need only repeated small exclusions until the heart writes its own law. Her mother Janet was elegant, ambitious, and cool in the way certain women of that world learned to be, not from a lack of feeling, but because feeling was inconvenient. When the marriage ended in 1940, Lee was 7. Janet did not collapse, she reorganized. In 1942, she married Hugh Auchincloss, a wealthy and stable man with estates and a secure place in the older American order. The Bouvier girls moved into grand houses in Virginia and Newport. The money steadied, the table grew longer, and the little girl who had already learned to watch simply had a larger household to study. She was given the right schools and the right introductions. She was beautiful, more openly so than Jackie, with delicate bones and a face cameras would one day love. She had a precise instinct for rooms, color, proportion, the power of a well-placed object. But in her world, such gifts were treated as ornament, not vocation. And everywhere she went, Jackie had passed through first. Lee tended to arrive not as a beginning, but as a comparison. By 17, she had understood something about her world that would shape everything after, that some scepters are never earned at all. They are simply placed into the right hands, and soon she would go looking for one. By 1953, Lee was 20 and tired of being managed. Her first answer was marriage. Michael Canfield was handsome, polished, and useful in all the ways her upbringing had trained her to recognize. He worked in publishing, had manners, knew the right people. Around him floated a rumor, never confirmed, that he was the illegitimate son of the Duke of Kent, just enough of an aristocratic shimmer to make him interesting. They married in April 1953. Her father walked her down the aisle. For a moment, the old wound seemed to close. The beautiful daughter, the society wedding, the camera's attention, all of it briefly hers. 5 months later, Jackie married John F. Kennedy. That was the trouble with Lee's triumphs. They arrived, and then Jackie's arrived larger. Lee had a husband in publishing. Jackie had a senator. Lee had a wedding. Jackie had the wedding people would remember. The Canfield marriage soon thinned. Michael drank. The money was less solid than it looked. Lee tried London, tried parties, tried to feel like something more than an American girl peering through European glass. She entertained beautifully. Still, the ground would not hold. Then came Prince Stanisław Radziwill. Stas was 17 years older, a Polish aristocrat whose family had lost land and power in the wars, but never the name. His title was not a rumor or a shimmer. It was real, and it had weight. They married on March 19, 1959, once each was free, with a Catholic ceremony following to give the union the recognition that mattered in the circles Lee wanted. Princess Radziwill. The words changed the air around her. They gave her something Jackie did not have. Lineage, old Europe, a name that sounded as if it had survived fires and borders and centuries. For a while, the marriage gave her beauty with substance beneath it. She and Stas had 2 children, Anthony in 1959 and Anna Christina in 1960, and built a life between London, the English countryside, and New York. Their house at Turville Grange became a place of elegance and conversation, arranged with Lee's exact eye. She knew how a room should breathe, where a chair belonged, how to make wealth feel intimate rather than loud. She was no longer merely Janet's younger daughter, nor merely Jackie's sister. She had taken up a scepter of her own. And then in January 1961, Jackie became First Lady of the United States. The Radziwill name was old. The White House was immediate. Princess belonged to drawing rooms. First Lady belonged to the world. Lee was 27, and she had everything she had been told to want. She did not yet know how easily a scepter could be lifted from her hands. In the early 1960s, Jacqueline Kennedy became more than a president's wife. She became an image. The hair, the clothes, the voice, the restored White House, the controlled grace. America saw youth and power made beautiful. Lee moved through that world with practiced ease. She visited the White House, traveled with Jackie, attended dinners where ambassadors and actors and financiers all leaned toward the First Lady, as if warmth came from her alone. Lee knew exactly how to behave in such rooms. She had trained for them all her life, and yet the old arithmetic always returned. Jackie was the subject. Lee was the relation. Jackie was the story. Lee was the beautiful sister, just within the frame. It would be easy to call this envy and stop there. It was harder than that, because Lee loved her. The bond was real. They telephoned, traveled, whispered, laughed, wounded and repaired each other and continued. The rivalry did not cancel the love. It only made the love harder to carry. In 1962, she accompanied Jackie on a celebrated tour through India and Pakistan, dressed beautifully, performed her part with skill, and watched the world's attention refuse, as it always did, to divide itself evenly. Around this time, she drew close to Truman Capote, who collected women like her, brilliant, stylish, admired, and quietly wounded. With Capote, she was not the president's sister-in-law or somebody's princess. She was clever, amusing, a woman with opinions. That mattered to her more than it should have had to. And then there was Onassis. Aristotle Onassis was a force, a Greek shipping magnate with money enough to make his own weather. He knew Lee and stars. He drew them into his world and entered theirs. He invited them aboard the Christina, his great yacht, where rank and money and flirtation mingled in the ocean air. And before Jackie, his attention had fastened on Lee. He listened to her. He enjoyed her. For long stretches he made her feel like the one who had been chosen first, and for Lee, that was no small thing. Then tragedy entered the Kennedy house. In August 1963, Jackie lost her infant son Patrick, born too early and gone within days. It was Lee who helped arrange escape, distance, sea air, the Christina. Jackie accepted, and the voyage meant to soothe one sister's grief placed both of them once more in the same theatre of light. Onassis, who had once looked toward Lee, began to look differently at Jackie. No one announced it. Such things are felt long before they are spoken. Lee had survived comparison before, but this time the pattern began to feel like fate, and fate was not finished with the family. November 1963. Dallas. A motorcade, a pink suit, and a shot that did not only kill a president, it fixed his widow in the mind of the world forever. Lee was in London when the news came. She flew to Washington at once and found Jackie already moving through the nightmare with the terrible composure that would become part of the legend. In those days, Lee did the one thing a sister can do. She stayed close. She offered presence, not performance, small notes, quiet gestures, in a house where private grief had become national property. For a while, being Jackie's sister was not a burden, but a duty of love. But after Dallas, Jackie became something no sister could rival and no ordinary person could comfort. She was no longer merely admired, she was sanctified. The world wanted her sorrow to be beautiful, photogenic, almost sacred, and Jackie gave it what it asked. Lee grieved too. She had lost a brother-in-law. She had watched her sister's life break apart, but her grief was secondary because it was attached to Jackie's. People asked Lee how Jackie was. They did not ask, with the same hunger, what Lee had lost. And then came the quieter wound. Sometime in this period, Lee turned to Onassis directly, by one account, in a letter that raised the possibility of marriage. She was still married to stars, and her world would never have encouraged such plainness. Yet she set down what she had spent a lifetime managing to hide. Onassis did not answer as she had hoped. In the years after the assassination, his attention moved steadily toward Jackie. When Robert Kennedy was killed in June 1968, Jackie came to fear the violence that seemed to follow the Kennedy name, and Onassis understood both fear and opportunity. He could offer an island, guards, distance from America's staring grief. He could offer escape. October 1968, Skorpios, the Ionian Sea. Jacqueline Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis on his private island, and Lee was there. She dressed correctly. She stood where she was placed, and she watched the man who had once reached for her first marry the sister who had always drawn the larger light. She was 35, and she had a husband, a title, 2 children, beauty, every visible sign of fortune. And that was the moment the scepter slipped. Not because Jackie had reached for it, but because Lee had let herself believe, perhaps for the first time, that someone had seen her before he saw her sister. Then history repeated itself, almost cruelly, in the salt air of a Greek island. She came home from Skorpios without a scene, without tearing the family in public. She continued. but everything after carried the taste of that island. After Onassis married Jackie, Lee's old wish for a life that bore her own name grew sharper. She turned to acting, and she deserves more sympathy for it than she usually receives. It is easy to mock a princess who wants a stage. It is harder to see the ache beneath it. Acting promised an identity made by talent, not by birth or marriage or sisterhood. Applause addressed to her alone. In 1967, she played Tracy Lord in the Philadelphia Story in Chicago, a part almost too fitting, a poised society woman learning the limits of her own composure. She trained, prepared, stepped before an audience already curious about who she was. The reviews were unkind. Critics saw beauty and effort, but not transformation. The performance seemed arranged rather than lived. A television Laura the following year fared no better. The camera admired her face more than her acting, and the experiment ended. There was no scandal in it, only something colder, public proof that wanting a thing and being able to do it are not the same. Her marriage was thinning at the same time. By the early 1970s, the warmth had gone out of it, and she and Stars divorced in 1974. 2 years later, he died of a heart attack in London. The man who had given her the name and the title and the European self she had wanted so badly gone. She kept the name. It still suited her better than the others. Where her gifts were real, she found real work. She built a career in interiors, formed Lee Radziwill Incorporated, and made rooms with a discipline few could imitate. She moved among artists and designers and writers, and decades later, even Giorgio Armani would lean on her social intelligence and her eye. She understood that a chair could reveal a life, that a room could confess what a person never said aloud. And still it was not quite enough. Even her refugees turned. Capote, who had once seen her loneliness without asking her to explain it, made literary material of the women who had trusted him, and the circle of swans became a circle of wounds. Lee, who had confided in him, learned again that intimacy could become exposure. In 1972, she helped set in motion a film about her Bouvier relatives, the Beals, the project that led indirectly to Grey Gardens. Even there, the old pattern held. Lee opened the door, and others walked through it into lasting memory. In 1988, she married a third time to the director Herbert Ross, a man with achievements of his own, the wedding in her own apartment, the luncheon at Jackie's. It sounded like a new chapter, but Ross belonged to his work, and Lee found herself once more beautifully attached and privately alone. That marriage, too, ended. Canfield, Radziwill, Ross, none of the names had quite held her. And then came the losses that could not be arranged or corrected. Jackie died in May 1994, with Lee close in the final days. To the world, Lee called her sister her closest friend, which was true. Privately, it was harder than ordinary grief, because Jackie had been the person she loved and resented and measured herself against from the first moment of memory. To lose her was to lose both the wound and the only witness to it. Then came the summer the cold arithmetic had been building toward all along. Her son Anthony, a television journalist who had made his own name, had been fighting cancer for years. In July 1999, his cousin John F. Kennedy Jr. died in a plane crash off Martha's Vineyard with his wife and her sister. And on August 10th, less than a month later, Anthony died. He was 40. She lost her sister, she lost her nephew, she lost her son. The title remained, the taste remained, the photographs remained. But something hollow had opened, and even Lee could not decorate it. After 2001, her life grew quieter, though never plain. She divorced Ross and never married again. The long succession of roles, daughter, wife, princess, sister of the First Lady, decorator, muse, loosened around her, and what remained was simply Lee, older, exacting, still able to enter a room with the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime studying how rooms behave. She made image-heavy books, curated rather than confessional, offering glimpses and never surrender. She had long since entered the best-dressed hall of fame, and the honor suited her, because clothes had never been only clothes for Lee. They were armor and language and rank. Her homes still drew the magazines. If she had not conquered the stage, she had mastered the art of living visibly, not loudly, visibly, and one by one the tables emptied. Jackie was gone, Stars was gone, Onassis was gone, Capote was gone, Anthony was gone. There is a particular silence that gathers around the very old who were once celebrated for their beauty. The world remembers the face and keeps expecting it to answer. Lee carried herself through that silence with dignity, among friends and admirers, and the diminishing circle that age allows. On February 15, 2019, Lee Radziwill died at home in Manhattan. She was 85. Her family gave natural causes. They buried her from a New York church, remembered by people from fashion and art and society for her elegance, her wit, her presence. And afterwards, at Christie's, her collection was sold, the objects she had chosen and placed and lived among, passing into other hands. That is what possessions do when the one who chose them is gone. It is tempting to reduce her, the younger sister, the beautiful one, the princess, the woman Onassis looked at before he looked away, the woman who tried the stage and failed and made beautiful rooms instead. But her life is not its caption. She was privileged. It would be foolish to pretend otherwise. She was born to names and houses and introductions most people never approach, and she knew presidents and princes and artists and men who owned islands. And none of it freed her from comparison or made love simple, or spared her the brutal timing by which one death arrives before another has been mourned. There is something strangely human in that, though her rooms were grander than ours. To spend a lifetime near a brighter light is not the same as living in darkness. It is something more delicate and perhaps more painful. You are illuminated and never fully seen. She wanted to be chosen first. Sometimes she was, never often enough. She wanted work that bore her name. Sometimes she had it, never quite securely. She wanted Jackie's love without Jackie's measure, and she got the love, but the measure never left. She left beauty behind her. Rooms, clothes, photographs, children, friendships, a taste so exact it became her truest signature. But the old photograph still holds her where it always held her, in the Greek light, perfectly composed, smiling beside the people history preferred. The palace was quiet at last, and the throne beside the center stood empty. If you found something of yourself in this story, even for a moment, you may find it in the next one too. Subscribe to The Fallen Scepter and stay with us. There are many more lives to remember.